Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to Total War Warhammer 2. Today is going to be the third part of my sponsored series of army guides, and we're going to be looking at the Lizardmen. The Lizardmen have variety within their roster that matches their monstrous size. And if you've ever wanted to have your own Jurassic Park, so to say, now might be the opportunity with the Lizardmen. I'm going to let you know all about the Skinks, the Saurus, the Slan Priests, the Croxigors that you can see here, Bastillodons, Staggered Ons, Carnosaurs, and some of the specialist artillery that the Lizardmen have. So without further ado, let's get started. So firstly, let's take a look at the two lords that you can choose to play in the Lizardmen campaign. First up, Kroq-Gar. Kroq-Gar is also known as the last defender of Zoltul, which was an ancient Lizardmen temple city that was taken by chaos shortly before the elves were able to conduct their great ritual. But there's one thing that you might be thinking that Kroq-Gar is missing. Yeah, that's better. You can't have Kroq-Gar without his mighty Carnosaur Grimlock, which if you choose to upgrade Kroq-Gar with, turns him into a terror on the battlefield, both in the multiplayer and also in the campaign. Kroq-Gar is equipped with two key weapons. Firstly, the Hand of the Gods, which was given to him by the Slan High Priest Mazdamundi. And in Total War Warhammer 2, his Hand of Gods is a usable ability to strike some missile damage that is very useful against a single combatant. It can still do some damage against multiple opponents, but as we can see, this lord pretty much just lost about 20% of his starting hit points. He's not going to do very well if you can get one or possibly two spell casts before you launch yourself into melee with him. Kroq-Gar also has an ability called Cold-Blooded, which you can use on either yourself or on your allies. This will regenerate the hit points of your ally or yourself, but be warned that it's going to reduce your speed by a quarter, your melee defense, and your melee attack massively. So this is not a healing ability that you can throw up to somebody who's already engaged in combat, but after somebody has hopefully won the battle, then top them up. The other choice is arguably the greatest spellcaster on the face of the earth. It is Lord Mazdamundi. Mazdamundi is the oldest and the most powerful of the living Slan priests, who levitates atop a grand palanquin throne. And just like Kroq-Gar, Mazdamundi has access to a fabled beast that he can ride into battle. And of course, to carry something so gigantic, it has to be the biggest Staggered On that the Lizardmen have known for the last 500 years. It is Slark. So let's take a look at some of Mazdamundi's spells. Firstly, the Ruination of Cities. Yeah, not bad. That's an entire unit just demolished. Next up, let's try Banishment. You can't control the direction it goes, but again, that's about a lot of dead rats, right? He also has an ability called Arcane Unforgiving, and when he uses this on an enemy lord, it will increase their ability recharge time by 30 seconds, which makes him fantastic for countering enemy casters. He can also use the Net of Amun-Tok to be able to lock down his opponents, which will lock everybody in place, which can be really useful if maybe you want to leave the combat like this. And then how about locking them in place and then combining it with a bit of banishment, right? Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. He also has a curse called the Midnight Wind, which reduces armor and melee attack, and can also buff his allies to have increased melee attack and melee defense. And finally, let's use the Comet of Cassandora. Now let's take a look at the melee infantry available in the Lizardmen Army. Firstly, the Skink cohorts. Skinks are the smallest breed inside the Lizardmen faction, and the cohorts are incredibly cheap, which make them a fantastic meat shield. They're also rather fast indeed, as we can see here, with a base speed of 46, which makes them proficient if you can engage enemy ranged units that aren't fast enough to run away. The Skink cohort are both shielded and also aquatic, which makes them better at fighting inside shallow water, where other units would struggle. Next up, the Saurus Warriors. These are the mainstay of the Lizardmen Army, and then your go-to unit for holding the line against pretty much everything. This unit is pretty much good at everything, but one thing that they are exceptional at is leadership. 75 base means that they're going to hang around in combat for quite some time. Saurus Warriors also have predatory senses, which make them more likely at finding the sneaky units on the battlefield, but this is a key point here. They have a penalty called primal instincts, which means when they're pressured and they take sufficient amounts of damage, they ignore all of the orders you give them and just simply attack the nearest enemy. This can be a real problem if the enemy have managed to get them into an engagement which they're just not efficient in, and they're gonna stay there. There's nothing that you can do about it, but it's kind of a balancing mechanic as to why the base attributes are just so cheap for the Lizardmen Army given their price. And if you want to make your Saurus Warriors just a little bit better, then you can equip them with shields as well, which will make them a bit better at taking missile fire, and also, as we can see, increase their melee defense by 6, which is significant. However, if you need to take on large foes, you can replace the mace of the Saurus Warriors with a spear. Now this will reduce their melee attack by 4, their weapon strength by 10, and their charge bonus by 6, but what it will do is give them a charge defense against large opponents, as well as being beneficial against anything bigger than a horse. And just like with the mace infantry, if you want to upgrade your speared Saurus a little bit, then you can give them shields. And the bonuses that you get are exactly the same. 6 more melee attack and you're going to be better at taking artillery and archer fire. Next up, let's take a look at the elite infantry available to the Lizardmen. These are the Temple Guards, who are charged with protecting the Slan Priests. In Total War Warhammer 2, the Temple Guards are an all-round upgrade over your regular Saurus with a mace. Their armor is 25 better. Their leadership is a whopping 90. They got a bit more health, melee attack, and melee defense, but they've got a little less weapon strength and charge bonus. But as they're equipped with rather fearsome halberd maces, this makes them pretty good against anti-large and infantry at the same time, as well as being armor piercing and having a charge defense bonus. And the main benefit of the Temple Guard over the regular Saurus is that they do not have primal instincts, so they're not going to ignore your orders when they get low on health and they're under pressure. The Temple Guards are a great late game unit to have in the campaign and can pretty much replace all of your Saurus units, but just be willing to pay the increased economic cost to house them. Now let's take a look at some of the ranged units available to the Lizardmen, and they are all skinks. Firstly, skinks with javelins. Skinks with javelins are rather quick, and so they're best used to harass the enemies at the start of the battle. Now, they have to stand still while they fire, which is an important aspect when we're going to be considering the other units available. But as they are ludicrously fast, even faster than the Skaven on foot, this makes the javelins really good at getting away from their opponents and kiting them and just stopping and throwing spears and softening them up before they reach your main army. One thing to watch out for about the skinks with javelins is they start with a real low amount of ammunition. They're quickly going to run out, and then you're going to have to resort to holding down that out key and sending them into melee combat. Alternatively, skink skirmishers are available, which sacrifice their shields to be able to take up their blow darts. As we can see here, you lose a significant amount of statistics, but you gain a whopping amount of ammunition and speed. And seriously, these javelins start with only 3 ammunition, and it's kind of dubious if the skink skirmishers with their javelins can even really be considered a prolonged ranged unit. While skink skirmishers are great within their own right, there is just a better version of them that you will be able to unlock later on in the campaign, and those are the chameleon skinks, which, as we can see, have a smaller unit size of 90 instead of 120, but just everything else about them is better. Chameleon skinks also have a unique ability called chameleon, and both the skirmishers and the chameleons have vanguard deployment, which means that you can set them up really close to the enemy lines at the beginning of the battle. Now, one thing that is amazing about chameleon skinks is they have a unique ability called chameleon, which means that they can move hidden in any terrain and is exceptionally hard to target with missile attacks. The chameleon skinks were amongst my favorite units to play through with the campaign. Their ability to fire on the move is just exceptional, and amazing mobility and a good amount of ammunition as well means that they can really soften up their opponent's hit points before they manage to get into melee combat. And that's if they're ever going to manage to get into melee combat with you. Remember, these are some of the fastest infantry in the game. So you've seen the infantry, you've seen the range. Now let's focus on the Lizardmen cavalry. Firstly, the cold ones, the feral cold ones to be exact. Feral cold ones are both armored and armor piercing, and so that makes them a great all-rounder for charging into whatever you want. And if you've ever thought about having your own clever girl moment from Jurassic Park, well, now might be the time. You should be careful, however, because just like the Saurus, the feral cold ones have the rampage ability, which means that when they're under pressure and they get damaged, they're going to start to ignore all of your orders, and that can be rather frustrating when you want your cavalry to focus on the ranged units that might be running away from you. Nevertheless, if you're a traditionalist, then the cold one riders might be more up your street. And as I guess 2 jaws are better than 1, these are a definitive upgrade over the feral cold ones without their riders. More health, more leadership, a little bit slower as you would expect with that extra weight, but better melee attack, melee defense, weapon strength, and charge bonus. And luckily it looks like these guys forego the rampage that the feral cold ones will be afflicted with. And interestingly enough, they're armored, shielded, and armor piercing. However, if you want to try and take on large units, and having some anti-large cavalry is pretty darn useful, then there is an option to equip them with spears instead. Later on in the campaign though, you might be looking for something more. How about the horned ones? Stronger versions of the cold ones, and these are lucky Sauruses because these are exceptionally rare. And as we can see here, the horned ones are an upgrade in every way over the cold one riders. More health, armor, leadership, speed, melee attack, weapon strength, and charge bonuses. And while they're both armored, shielded, armor piercing, and they've got those predatory senses which make them be able to spot sneaky opponents all the more easy, unfortunately, unlike the cold one riders, they suffer from primal instincts. And while there's no doubt that horned ones are incredibly powerful and exceptionally fun in the right fight, it was incredibly frustrating to use them in the campaign, because if they got engaged against something that they weren't very good against, spearmen for example, you couldn't pull them back out of combat, and you had to watch one of the most expensive units for you to field just get absolutely demolished. And so I recommend careful planning when you are using your horned ones, otherwise you might find your elite cavalry just don't stack up to, for example, the dragon princes from the high elves. So now let's take a look at what makes the Lizardmen faction just so special, at least for me, and that is its monstrous units. Take a look at these guys. They are the Croxigors, and yeah, they're just a little bit bigger than your regular Saurus lizardmen. Croxigors are both armored and armor piercing, and with a single swing of their maul, they can take out whole swathes of the enemy. They're fantastic shock troops, and when I was playing through the Lizardman campaign, I think they were probably my favorite unit within the Lizardmen faction. However, if you're looking for something a little bigger, then maybe the Illidan will be more your cup of tea. The Illidan is one of the most well-armored units in the entirety of Total War Warhammer 2. And when you combine this with a decent old slab of hit points, the Illidan can usually stand up to just about anything the enemies can throw at it. And while they certainly aren't the fastest unit around, when they get into the combat, they're none the least effective. Be warned, however, because the Illidans, a lot like the Saurus, have the rampage trait, which means that if it's under pressure, it's going to start ignoring your orders and focus its attacks on the nearest enemy. There is also the option to upgrade the Illidan with a revivification crystal. And while, as we can see, everything is better about this moving fortress, it has 2 very nice perks. Number 1, the fact that it has some ranged units, some skinks sitting on top. And secondly, the revivification crystal itself can actually be used to heal injured units and even resurrecting dead combatants. The revivification crystal has 10 uses inside the battle with a 45-second cooldown. And take a look as we change the Croxigors. There we go. Previously they had 14 inside their unit, now they've got 15. And as we can see, their hit points is slowly going up. While this ability probably isn't going to be battle changing, as it does recover quite a low amount of hit points, it can be very useful at the end after the enemy has routed onside the campaign map if you want to just bring your units back to full health. If you're having some attrition issues on the campaign map, maybe you've gone bankrupt, or alternatively you're just stuck in a real tricky situation and you can't afford any losses and you need your armies operating at maximum capacity. If you want a little bit more offense, then maybe the Staggered On will be more your cup of tea. As we can see, we've got more hit points, less armor, better speed, melee attack, melee defense, weapon strength, and charge bonus. And that's about all there is to say. I personally would replace all of my Bastillodons with Staggered Ons inside the campaign, and also in the multiplayer battles if you can afford to do so. However, if you want to focus even more on offense, then maybe the Carnosaur will be the better choice. The Carnosaur has less hit points and less armor than the Staggered On, but it has much better speed, 50% better speed to be exact, better melee attack, melee defense, weapon strength, but a little less charge bonus. But the Carnosaur has a couple of key useful attributes, and that is Frenzy, which when its leadership is above 50% makes it immune to psychology, have increased melee attack, charge bonus, weapon damage, all of that good stuff which the Staggered On just doesn't have access to. Also, as an apex predator, the Carnosaur is anti-large, which can give it the edge against other monstrous units, and while it can't fly like a dragon, if it manages to lock them in combat, it is really gonna kick their butt. Talking about flying units, the Lizardmen have access to two of them. Firstly, the Pterodon Riders, which have Vanguard deployment, which allows you to locate close to the enemy at the beginning of the battle, and they're just absolutely incredible for harassment. They've also got an ability called Death from Above, which they can only use once per battle, and when you mouse over it, you can see where it's going to land below. And so if you position yourself over the mainstay of the enemy forces, you can drop your rocks to do a significant amount of damage before they even reach the fight. But timing is crucial here, as you only get one opportunity, but once you've dropped your rocks, they can still do some impressive missile damage, and their attacks are poisonous, which will reduce the speed and the damage of the afflicted targets. Once you use up all of your ammunition, or even if the situation just dictates it, the Pterodon Riders can also crash down into melee combat. But I don't recommend doing this too much unless you literally are engaging very weak units like the Skaven Slaves, as the Pterodon Riders are very fragile, having fairly low hit points and practically no armor, so they're not going to last in the combat for long. There is also the option to equip your Pterodon Riders with Fire Leech Bowlers, and while this reduces the amount of ammunition they carry and also the range that they can engage, it makes their damage fire-based. As well as being anti-infantry, I had a lot of fun using the Pterodon Riders when you're sieging enemy fortifications, and if they do cluster up, these Fire Leech Bowlers are just absolutely devastating, and just like the regular Pterodon Riders, they can also drop their rocks, which can be very useful against clustered up forces. Personally, for me, the Fire Leech Bowlers are the far better of the two units, and I think if you're going to be taking Pterodon Riders, it's probably worth spending the little bit extra to have all of that firepower. So far I haven't touched on the artillery units available to the Lizardmen, and if you've played Total War games before, you'll know that artillery units are immobile and also very vulnerable indeed. Well, not the Lizardmen. They've whacked their artillery on the back of a Bastillodon, and as we can see, the Bastillodon with the solar engine has all of the regular combat capacity of a standard Bastillodon. The solar engines can do a decent amount of damage to infantry units, but be warned, their ranged attacks are not armor-piercing. Only it's the melee attacks that are armor-piercing. And so they're a little like the Plague Claw Catapult if you're familiar with the Skaven. Use these to focus on the enemy infantry, soften them up, and use a different unit, which I'm going to discuss right now, to engage the large. So just like the Bastillodon, the Staggered On has an artillery variant. And while your charge bonus dips by 6, your leadership goes up and you've got a tiny bit more hit points, but the key advantage is that you no longer have that rampage ability. Your units are going to listen to you irrelevant of how well they're doing in the combat. These Stegodons carry a giant crossbow, which is armor piercing, perfect for cracking open those heavy targets. And also the skinks on top can help when you close the distance, and their spears are poisonous, which will help to weaken the enemy. When we compare the artillery Stegodon to the solar engine Bastillodon, we can clearly see that while the armor is slightly down and the actual missile damage is, the range has pretty much gone up by half, you've got more ammunition, and just everything about the unit is better. However, there's actually another variant of Stegodon artillery. It is the ancient Stegodon, which has more health, armor, leadership, less melee attack, but better weapon strength. And as we can see, they've got outrageous missile damage of nearly 700, which is also poisonous, but they carry a limited amount of ammunition and their range is only 115, which means that archers are going to have longer range than this specialist artillery. And if you're wondering what this artillery fires to do so much damage at medium range, it's basically like a blowgun machine gun, and it can be really efficient at softening up weakly armored targets. But the best things about these ancient Stegodons is that they firstly can fire on the move, and when the enemy do close the distance after losing a lot of their hit points, they kick just as much butt in combat as your regular Staggered On does. The Lizardmen artillery truly is one of the most powerful, versatile artillery units that's ever gone into Total War, and while it might not be able to wipe out units as quickly as traditional artillery, it doesn't have any of their vulnerabilities, and I think it's a decent payoff. And I think all in all, it just highlights how different the Lizardmen are to some of the other factions that you might be used to in a Total War game, and after playing the Lizardmen on the campaign, you might agree that variety sometimes is the spice of life. And so there you have it, hopefully a good introduction to all of the units available inside the Lizardmen roster. I've been really enjoying making these videos, only one more to go now. Next time we're going to be looking at the Dark Elves. And hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. And let me know in the comments down below what you think about the Lizardmen Army roster. Are there any units from the fantasy that are missing? Or do you think Creative Assembly have done a good job in adding everything that you wanted from this faction? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.